न सद्वासद्यदपि परमं वेदवातन्न वेद यत् सत्यं तन्न खलु कुशलैश्छिद्यते तर्कबाणैः द्वैताद्वैतात्यखिलमतिभिर्यत्पदं सेव्यते तत् वन्दे चेतो विलयनिलयं शारदापादपद्मम् साङ्ख्यं योगं पशुपतिमतं वैष्णवं वा यथेच्छं चार्वाकं वा भवतु हृदयाह्लादकं सज्जनानां यत् सत्यं तत् प्रमितिपथगं स्वप्रकाशं वरेण्यं दद्याच्छौख्यं जगति सकलं दर्शनं शारदाया.
My apologies for the technical difficulties, but welcome to the 9th talk in our Academia Vimarsha Hindu lecture series. Just as a reminder, the chat is there for you to write your questions. At the end of the talk, we'll ask you to unmute and ask your question, unless you want us to read it for yourself. Now, please, Acharya-ji, introduce the speaker for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Sachchidanand Mishra. Sorry for my throat today. Thank you, Dr. Sachchidanand Mishra, and thank you all in the audience. Most of you, many of you anyway, do already know Dr. Sachchidanand Mishra, and I'm humbled to introduce him to this forum today, who has actually guided us through the birth of this academia when we were just brainstorming for the ideas of how to launch the academia. And so in that regard, he has been a mentor to us, an advisor to us. Besides that, Dr. Sachchidanand Mishra is the member secretary of Indian Council of Philosophical Research. He is a senior professor, and his area of research includes Nyaya, Vedanta, Buddhist philosophy, and you know what, also Charvaka philosophy. He has worked in many areas. He's proficient in English, Sanskrit, Hindi, Bangla, and many other languages. His research currently is in Indian logic and epistemology, conceptual development of Navya Nyaya. He has worked in some of the common accessible books to some of the most difficult texts ever written in Sanskrit language. He has original work in Charvaka philosophy with his own auto-commentary. He has written original books in Hindi language or has edited several volumes and brought, like translated from Bangla to Hindi also. And the works like in Vedanta, he has explored manuscript and edited Manasollasa with the Manasollasa Vardhini of Anantakrishna Shastri. And he has also worked on Vyutpattivada, a detailed introduction and commentary in Hindi in 2 volumes, besides many other articles and books. Thank you, Dr. Sachchidanand Mishra, for your presence. And now the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Namaste, everybody. Respected Professors Thaneshwar Timalsinaji and the learned scholars from different part of world. This is a great opportunity to discuss with you all a very important idea, that is revisiting Charvak materialism. First of all, I would like to point out why did I choose this topic to interact, to talk with you all. And why did I write a book on Charvaka philosophy? My book, which is recently published last year from Indian Council of Philosophical Research, that is Nava Charvaka Karikavali. The text written in Sanskrit shlokas and an auto commentary of that, which I published. The reason I got interested in Charvaka philosophy is this one, that Charvaka philosophy is full of misconceptions. And because there is no Charvaka philosophical text available, we become aware of Charvaka philosophy through the refutations of Charvaka philosophy. And if one is forced to know about a philosophy or about a person from their opponents, that is not a good thing to know. Therefore, I tried to present Charvaka philosophy as a Siddhanta Paksha. Because in Indian philosophical tradition, the philosophies are propounded as Purva Paksha or Siddhanta Paksha. If a Nayayik is writing a book on Nyaya philosophy, he presents Nyaya philosophy as a kind of Siddhanta Paksha. But when someone else, a Vedantin or a Buddhist or a Charvaka, writes a text on Nyaya philosophy, the Nyaya philosophy is presented as a kind of Purva Paksha, the prior position. If I translate the term, the prior position. Therefore, Siddhanta Paksha is understood as Uttara Paksha, the later position. This is to say, we begin with a philosophy. Initially, we begin with a philosophy, and later on, we come to this conclusion that this philosophy is not tenable. Rather, there is another philosophy which is tenable, which is logically sound. So every branch of philosophy has this kind of attitude, and all the traditions propound their philosophies in this manner. But this is unfortunate that Charvaka philosophy is never presented in such a way. Therefore, I try to think of Charvaka philosophy as a kind of Siddhanta Paksha or Uttara Paksha. And this gave me some very important insights, that actually the refutations are many places misplaced. Take, for example, the refutation by Udayanacharya in Nyaya Kusumanjali of Charvaka philosophy, where he refutes Akasmadvad, the theory of Charvakas, that is Akasmadvad. That refutation is, if I read the Karika of Nyaya Kusumanjali, it reads, Hetu bhuti nishedhona swanupakya vidhirnacha swabhava varnana naivam avadher niyatatvatah. So when you are saying akasmad vada, this is to say na kasmad bhavati. It is not produced by someone. So what are you negating? You cannot negate the production. You cannot negate the causes. You cannot say that the thing originates from Swanupakya. This is to say, like Shashashringa hare's horn. And if you say that this statement is Swabhavabad, by nature, everything is produced. That is also not trainable. And one argument is provided, avadher niyatatvatah, because there is a time limit. So, in such a way, many examples can be seen. For example, there is a very problematic point. It is very much understood, very much known that Charvakas do not accept inference as a kind of pramana. And when I examined it, I found that it should not be taken as a kind of reputation of inference. However, there are so many arguments. And from the Charvaka side, in many texts, there are so many arguments to refute, to claim that inference is not a type of pramana. But if I visit Kautilya's Arthashastra, where it is very clearly mentioned that there are four kinds of vidyas: Anvikshiki, Trayi, Varta, Dandanitischa, Shashwati. There are four kinds of vidyas: Anvikshiki, Trayi, Varta, and Dandaniti. And later on, Kautilya explains what he means when he is saying Anvikshiki, a kind of vidya. He explains that there are three types of Anvikshiki. And it says that Sankhyam Yogo Lokayatam Chaiti Anvikshiki. In that statement of Kautilya, Yoga word mentions Nyaya philosophy. And Sankhya is known to everybody. And there is a Lokayata. And from this statement, we can know very clearly that in Charvaka philosophy, inference has to play a very important role. Because this philosophy is Anvikshiki. And what does it mean, Anvikshiki? Anvikshaya pravartamanam shastram Anvikshiki. The Shastra, the tradition, the philosophical school, which is based on inference, that is Anvikshiki. And this is amazing to know that it is understood that Charvaka philosophy doesn't accept inference as a kind of pramana. And the whole exercise by the opponents is there how to make Charvakas believe that there is a possibility to accept that inference is a kind of pramana. And this exercise goes on in many texts, in Tattva Chintamani, in Udayanacharya's Nyaya Kusumanjali, and so many other texts. Only a few places we can understand that there was a school of Charvakas which believes in the authenticity of inference, which accepted that inference is a kind of pramana. However, there are two texts. One is Jayanta Bhatta's Nyaya Manjari, and another one is Tattva Sangraha. However, the understanding is not very clear. How the Charvakas could accept that inference is a kind of pramana. Then there is another point which is very important for Charvakas, that this is the single school in Indian philosophical tradition which believes that the body is the knower. Every other philosophy leaves this position, refutes this position. But only Charvakas are there who believe that body is the knower. And how it can be established? This is a challenge. And all other schools tried to refute this position of Charvakas. So, and there is another point. This is a common belief in Indian philosophical tradition that if you accept Charvaka philosophy, you cannot have any kind of morality. You cannot have any type of ethics. And therefore, because when we see Jayanta Bhatta's Nyaya Manjari, Jayanta Bhatta tells, Nahi lokayate kinchit kartavyam upadishyate vaitandik kathaivasav na punaha kaschidagamaha. So, it means simply that in Charvaka philosophy, there is no kartavya, what to do and what not to do. There are no prescriptions. It only refutes the positions propounded by other philosophies. Therefore, this philosophy is only a kind of negative philosophy, Vaitandika Katha, because there is a Vitanda which only refutes the positions propounded by others. Never they propound their own philosophy. Never they accept, logically propound their own philosophies. Therefore, there are basically so many confusions, misconceptions regarding Charvaka philosophy. And there is a problem also how to reconstruct and understand Charvaka philosophy. There is always a point of going in wrong direction, for the simple reason that there are no text available of Charvakas. Only some Charvaka sutras are available. Only a few refutations of Charvaka philosophy are available. So how to reconstruct? This is another challenge. But going through those texts which are available, we can establish Charvaka as a kind of Siddhanta Paksha. And I came to this conclusion that actually Charvaka philosophy is a very systematic philosophy. And if thought in that direction, there are ample grounds to reconstruct it. So basically, I pointed out that in Shaddarshan Samuchaya, as Charvaka philosophy is presented, the Charvaka philosophy believes in Swabhavavad theory and also Akasmadvad theory. If we observe that these two theories, it is never thought that these two theories are presenting different ideas. Because when you are propounding Akasmadvad, as it is understood, Akasmadvad is understood as a kind of theory which believes that there is no causal conditions are available. There is no possibility of causal relationship. No causality is possible. Akasmadvad is understood in that way. And second theory, Swabhavavada. Swabhavavad presents that there is a kind of causal theory is available. The examples which are given in Sharddarshan Samuchaya, those examples very clearly present the picture that Swabhavavad is very much similar to the theory of Satkaryavad, with some modifications, some conditions. Essentially, Satkaryavad believes that effects are pre-existent in the cause. Swabhavavad doesn't believe in this theory. According to Swabhavavad, and this is very interesting to note, that the same type of examples are given in Sharddarshan Samuchaya. The example is given there that why milk turns into curd, because it is its nature. And this is the same type of argument which is given by Sankhya philosophers when they are propounding that why curd is produced from milk, but the implications, the conclusions are different for the Sankhyas, and here there is a difference of philosophical school. The Sankhya philosophy says that actually curd is present, pre-existent in milk, therefore milk is turning into curd. But the Charvaka philosophy doesn't say this. It says simply that we cannot say that curd is pre-existent in the milk because we do not perceive that. Because for Charvakas, any theory which is not supported by perception, directly or indirectly, that is not tenable. So the Sankhya theory is not tenable because it goes against our perception. You are accepting that curd is pre-existent in the milk, but you cannot prove through perception that curd is pre-existent there. You cannot perceive. And if you cannot perceive, you cannot accept it. Only you can say that milk is turning into curd. Therefore, this Charvaka theory, Swabhavavad, is a kind of Asatkaryavada. The effect is not pre-existent in the cause. And from the same examples, Charvaka philosophers build a different system. They go in a different direction. And here, there is a scope of accommodating these two theories, Akasmadvad and Swabhavavad. Because where this Akasmadvad is given, Akasmadvad theory is propounded where it is said that how something is coming, why some persons are born rich, why some persons are having endowed with some good faculty, some persons are blind, or vice versa. And here, other philosophers might provide the answer that this is due to some past karmas. But here Charvaka philosophy will not say that this is due to past karma. And here their answer will be akasmadvad. There is no causes are available. Because, and here there is same argument is given that the presence of old karma cannot be established through any pramana. Because it goes against our perceptual framework. Because every philosophy should be established directly or indirectly on perception. Why I am saying indirectly? Because I propounded that Charvakas believe in inference. Because there is a Charvaka Sutra which says that pramanasya agaunatvad anumana dartha samprapteyo durlabha. This is a very simple statement. This is a Brihaspati Sutra. Pramanasya agaunatvad anumanad artha samprapteyo durlabha. And here this sutra is quoted by Jayanta Bhatta, and that explanation which is provided by Jayanta Bhatta gives some insight why this philosophy should be understood in this way, that they believe in the pramanyava of inference. Because it says that anuman, praman, any praman should be agauna. There are two types of meanings. One is mukhya and another is gauna. When there is a word cow, go word is used in two senses, in a primary sense and in secondary sense. There is, when we try to use the term gau to talk about, to refer the animal which gives milk, this is the primary sense in which we are using the term. And there is another word way to understand it, gaurbahikaha. And here gau word doesn't mean an animal. Rather, gau word means a person who is very much similar to a cow or an ox. This is to say, the person is not capable of understanding so many things. Rather, he only very much similar in his ignorance. So if someone is classifying these two as cow, that will not be a proper classification. The Charvakas are saying that when you are saying that there is a pramana perception, in the same sense there could not be another pramana inference. Because when you are saying that inference is pramana, this is not in the same sense. As the cow word is not used in same sense when it is referring an animal and when it is referring an ignorant person. So Charvakas are warning that we should be very careful using the term that there are two pramanas. Because there is one pramana which is actually providing us knowledge, and there is another pramana which is also providing us knowledge, but with this limitation that the authenticity of that praman is very much limited by perception, which is not perceived. In that sense, inference cannot be a praman. So, taking this statement of Brihaspati, I concluded that there are two types of pramanas in Charvaka philosophy. In one sense, perception is a pramana. Perception makes us aware of new facts. And also, perception is the basic for all knowledge, because our knowledge begins with perception. But inference is also there, but with limitation. Inference operates in the field which is covered by perception. So if you are willing to extend the inference beyond the realm of perception, that is not acceptable to Charvakas. And this is the very unique position that in Indian philosophical tradition, except Charvakas, all philosophies, except Charvakas, and we have to differentiate grammarians also, because the grammarians don't believe in inference beyond this world, but they give the responsibility to Shastras, Shabda Pramana. So all other schools, whether these are Buddhist philosophies, whether these are this is Sankhya philosophy, or Yoga philosophy, or Nyaya philosophy, or Vaisheshik philosophy, all these philosophies extend the limit of inference to otherworldly. And therefore you can see in Pramanavartik refutation of Swabhavavada, refutation of Charvaka, and where Dharmakirti tries to establish that our actions, our karmas go beyond this world. So here, Charvaka philosophy makes a limit of inference to this world. The otherworldly cannot be known through inference. Therefore, as Anvikshiki word refers to Charvaka, in the same way in Mahabharata, there is a shloka which clearly says that Charvakas are Nyaya Tantra. Charvaka is a logical tradition. It is said, Nyaya Tantrani Anekani Tairuktani Vadibhi. So there are so many Nyaya Tantra. And in Kavya Mimamsa, Rajashekhar also very clearly says that there are 6 types of Anvikshiki. So the Charvaka philosophy should be understood as a philosophy which believes in inference. And taking this position, now we can reconstruct Charvaka philosophy. Because in order to establish a philosophy, there is only one way to establish. The logical foundation should be there. The arguments should be there. And those arguments are provided by Charvaka philosophies in Brihaspati Sutra, where it is said how consciousness arises. The very simple statement is there that there are 4 bhutas, and from those 4 bhutas, consciousness arises. And the very peculiar example is given. Kinvadibhyo madashaktivat. This is an example of Swabhavavad. And this philosophy, Swabhavavad, can be applied to morality also. Why there is a morality in this world? Why there is ethics in this world? And here also, I established that actually our Purusharth, there are two Purusharthas, Arth and Kama, earning money and enjoying the life. So these are two Purusharthas according to Charvaka. And why there is morality? Because if there is no morality, our Purusharthas cannot be fulfilled. Therefore, we have invented morality. So morality is actually needed. For example, when we are playing a game, no game is possible. No play is possible without some rules. Therefore, we have created some rules. In the same way, in this life, our desires cannot be fulfilled without some rules. And here, two persons, when they engage in copulation, they try to please others. And when they try to please others, in that process, they get more pleasure. In the same way, in this world, when we try to help others, we get benefited from that action, directly or indirectly. Therefore, there is morality in this world. So, going through these this Charvaka philosophy, how I tried to reconstruct it. This is actually a kind of crude philosophy, a naked philosophy. Naked philosophy in the sense that the truth is presented in a simple way without any wheel. Whatever is there, that this world is the limit. This is the basic assumption. And inference plays the role only in the realm of our perception. And any theory which is propounded that should be based on perception, or the inference which is based on perception. And here, Charvakas refute the inference which goes beyond this world, because there is no justification from perception. Therefore, Jayanta Bhatta uses the term Pratyakshotpanna Pratitik Anumana. That inference is valid, which is based on perception, where we can believe on the basis of perception. So that inference is valid. Other inferences cannot be accepted valid. Therefore, there is no possibility of otherworldly affair. So every concept should be explained taking the limit of our perceptual world. And this is actually what the term suggests, lokayat. Loka, which is perceptible and which is limited by this loka, perception. And in that way, we can reconstruct Charvaka philosophy. And this Charvaka philosophy, because there is a on the basis of perception and inference, everybody acts for the benefit of or for the enjoyment of his own. And I tried to establish that there is nothing which can be said that which benefits only others, because every action sarva eva pararthopi vastuta swartha eva hi. Every action which appears to be for the sake of others, for the benefit of others, it is actually for our benefit. When we help others because we become happy in helping others. So this is our nature. So in that way, we can explain the good in our life, the good part of our life where we help others. And going through in this direction, we can explain every action which is for the benefit of others. And I try to understand the morality in this context. I think given the time period, I have explained what I tried to discuss. And if there are some arguments, some questions, I will be discussing those. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Namaste.
Thank you very much, Professor Sachchidanand. So while we await the questions from the audience, if I may ask my question, I was asking if the Charvakas admit yogic perception or mental perception, or when you mean perception is just the one that arises in the contact between the five senses and a physical object.
That is a very interesting question. Charvakas do not admit and cannot admit any yogic perception. However, they must admit mental perception. How this will be called mental perception? Because the limit of Charvaka text, we do not find any term like mental perception. But when we become hungry, when we become aware of our own happiness, when we become aware of our own feelings, that all must be accepted. And if there is any other way, if you call it mental perception, there is no problem at all. But yogic perception cannot be accepted by Charvakas. One question is asked by, I have a question regarding refutation of Vyapti. Okay, that is good. Refutation of Vyapti. This is very interesting to say that the refutation of Vyapti is accepted without any problem. And here the Charvakas say that, and as it is explained by other philosophers, the Charvaka philosophy, that they say that inference provides only sambhavana. It doesn't provide any nishchaya. The determinate cognition is not provided by inference. It only provides probability. For example, when you have observed 100 times there is a smoke and fire, and then you observe a smoke, and thereafter you conclude that there is a fire. So this process goes on, and this cannot be repeated by Charvakas. Charvaka cannot say that we do not become aware of fire in the mountain, because this is the experience. In this way we all behave. The simple point the Charvakas say that whether you observed it 100 times or 1,000 times, but you cannot be sure that every time when you are observing smoke, there will be fire. So there is sambhavana, there is a probability, and on the basis of probability, our behavior is there. We behave. And in Western philosophical tradition, Western logical tradition, the theory of induction is very much similar to that. So here the Charvakas are not to blame. Sarva Darshan Sahitaya, which suggests that our perception are the result of our ichha, taken on like an actor. I wonder how we can account for a more inactive view of perception in terms of our Indian Pramana system.
Pranama
So here,
Sachchidananda ji, I guess because Anna's question really dovetailed with mine. So maybe I can rephrase it to get at something a little bit more novel, which is that one of the reasons that Acharya ji created this talk series was for us to kind of be at the cutting edge of cognitive sciences and some of these academic questions. And, you mentioned this thing of what's unique about the Charvakas is that, the inferences are limited to what can be perceived. But so many of these schools say that we can extend the realm of perception. And that's the yoga pratyaksha that you mentioned. One of the things that's really interesting, especially in the Pratyabhijna school, is, Kshemaraj is talking about this idea that, that's the Bhumika quote that I pasted in, which is saying that basically the darshanas that we follow are roles that the Atman takes on based on its own ichha. And so if we have a different ichha, we perceive the world through different darshans. And this seems to be a lot like kind of the cutting edge of the cognitive sciences, where perception is inactive. And so very often it seems like in the Brahmana schools, we separate out things like perception and inference. But if they're all part of a feedback loop, it seems like, at least that's what Kshemaraj is arguing, is that if our perception and our views are part of a feedback loop, this seems to be a very sort of different view than we typically talk about. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how to understand this inactive nature of perception, that the darshans that we hold shape what we can perceive, and then we only make inferences within what we can perceive. So is there some way to understand how our Brahmana system, the Charvakas, and all that might be at the more cutting edge of our cognitive science on this iterative feedback loop between our views and our perceptions? That would be kind of the question.
Actually, when we take this position in this way, that our own action, our own ichha plays a role in perception, I think Charvaka's philosophy, Praman is taken as an objective manner, where there is no role of ichha. Their ichha cannot play any role. Our desire doesn't play any role in our process of knowing. For example, very important, very interesting example is given by Nayayikas, that we do not want to know that our enemy is prospering, but we infer it. And there is no possibility, nobody desires. But without having any desire, we become aware of this fact through inference. Okay, so there is no ichha. And for the Charvakas, ichha doesn't play any role in inference. So for them, a perception is a simple observation. So perception is simple observation, and you can say inference is a kind of calculation. And there is no other way to understand it. Okay. There is another question asked by Anna. It can be argued that the Charvakas admit morality as a condition for the two Purusharthas, birth and calm. Does this mean that they accept karma, at least the sense that they must admit that every action has desirable or undesirable consequences? The point is that every action may have desirable or undesirable consequences, but this is not necessarily required. Our all actions, other philosophies accept that whatever we do, we are bound to enjoy the fruits of those doings. But Charvakas do not believe in it, because the perception itself goes against it. We observe that some persons are acting in a cruel way, but they are not punished. So how could you say that you, as you act, you enjoy the fruits of those doings? However, there is a possibility to enjoy what you are doing, therefore in some limit, and this is our attitude, because we want to make this world in this way. Therefore we have invented some rules, and accordingly we act. So every action has desirable or undesirable consequences. This is not tenable. May have, you can say that all actions might have desirable and undesirable consequences.
So are we talking about a determinist position about agency, or is there some room for agency in the sense that we can decide whether we enjoy the actions of the moment? What would be the Charvaka position on agency?
Actually, could you please explain your question?
So I didn't want to put it in terms of free will, but since everything is described in terms of perception, and we can perceive that when we act, we can perceive that if our action makes somebody else suffer, maybe we can change our decision to act in a different way. But then would they be explaining that capacity of deciding as coming from a will or not? How do they explain the possibility of choices?
We make the decisions, choiceful decisions. When we are acting, we know that what could be the result of that, and accordingly we act. What could be the result? Because it is in future, the result will be in future, so we cannot become aware of that with certainty. So there could be one result and could not be the result, but accordingly we act. So for example, when we sow the seeds, there could be a good crop, and there is another possibility that there will not be good crop, but we do that. We sow the seeds. in that way we act. So there is a place of agency who is doing, and this becomes very much complicated because we all are interacting with each other. Our actions and everybody, we all we have invented the morality so that our desires could be fulfilled in a right way, in a good way.
Thank you. So does anybody have there is a question by Dr. Biswajit. If you want, you can unmute yourself.
Dr. Biswajit Burman. Why we are giving more emphasis on Charvaka as upsetting the future in our real sir, it is my humble request is that when we are getting many utilitarian aspects in different Indian schools of philosophy, apart from Charvaka in our real life as well as for setting the future, then why we are giving more emphasis on Charvaka materialism? Why are you willing to give up Charvaka philosophy? Because I think the Charvaka philosophy is the basic philosophy. Basic philosophy. In Atma Tattva Viveka, in the conclusion part, Udayanacharya very clearly expounded that the Charvaka philosophy is the philosophy which is the first philosophy, you can say. So why should we give up this first philosophy? And if this philosophy itself can be elaborated, can be argued, can be substantiated, then why shouldn't we propound this philosophy? And in many places, from many directions, Charvaka philosophy, because it is not otherworldly, it is completely secular, and it is capable of explaining everything from one perspective. And any philosophy, any darshana, which is capable of explaining everything, I think that darshan is a complete darshan. Therefore, we should visit Charvaka philosophy and we should explore the Charvaka philosophy.
I have one more question about just the general project of trying to reconstruct views from the writings of sort of their opponents. I'm wondering if you've gained any sort of insight on, the culture of debate and the extent to which there was accuracy in representing opponents versus not, and if this teaches us something about how to treat polemic texts and whether we want to try to cross-reference, not just within the Charvaka realm, but just more generally. So I'm curious if you learned anything through this unique exploration that is a more generalizable insight for how we should treat the opponent views when we're reading our own texts.
This is simply when we refute other philosophies, we point out those weaknesses. Therefore, this is better to consult the original text of those systems. And this is unfortunate that we do not have some text on Charvaka philosophy there in their systematic way. Therefore, there is a need to understand Charvaka philosophy, because it makes the picture of Indian philosophy more accurate and more complete. Because all other philosophies give in a different direction and it provides a different picture from a different perspective. From the perspective where it discusses everything from common sense, from this world, perspective, and when you are propounding ethical philosophy. For example, I give one example. If the question is asked to all philosophies of India, why to be moral? Why to be moral? And the Naiyayikas would say that we should be moral, because if we do not be moral, this is we will be punished for what we act. If we are not acting in a moral way, we are going to be punished. We are if you try to avoid this term punished, we may say that we are going to suffer. Therefore, we should act morally. And if Charvaka is asked, why to be moral? The Charvak will answer that we do not have any other option. Therefore, we have to be moral. Because if we are not moral, we cannot enjoy this life. Therefore, morality is required in order to enjoy this life. Okay? So every theory can be explained taking the without taking reference to otherworldly. This is the beauty of Charvak system.
And so then it sounds like you kind of agree with like the position of maybe somebody like Abhinavagupta of you take a foundational philosophy as the basis and then you add higher and higher philosophies on top? Or would you say that it's not even appropriate to posit a hierarchy with something like, Pratyabhigya at the top or maybe Advaita Vedanta at the top? What is your particular view, having studied all these different darshans?
That is actually very interesting question. And my position is this one, that when you position one philosophy at the top, it is completely subjective decision. And I can give so many examples. Udayanacharya places the Nyaya philosophy at the top. Madhavacharya in Sarvadarsha Sangraha presents the Advaita philosophy at the top. Abhinavagupta places his own philosophy at the top. T.R.B. Murthy places the Shunyavada Madhyamik philosophy at the top. He says that this is the philosophy of philosophies. And in 20th century, there was a great philosopher, Rahul Sankrityan. He places Vaigyanika Bhautikavad, scientific materialism at the top. Okay, so from one perspective, Charvaka philosophy can be placed at the top. This is my position. But from other perspective, because when people are saying this is a completely subjective decision, why Advaita philosophy should be at the top? Charvaka will completely reject that this is no philosophy at all, because it talks about otherworldly. It is only speculative philosophy, and it is worthless if the Charvaka is asked. So how could you place the Advaita philosophy at the top? And how could you place Abhinavagupta's philosophy at the top? So it is completely subjective decision. And who is satisfied? And the point is this one, where you are satisfied. This is the this makes ourselves. This is the attitude of ourselves, where our mind gets satisfaction. This could be the possibility that Professor Timal Sina cannot get satisfied with Advaita philosophy or Charvaka philosophy. And another person can be there who is very much satisfied with Nyaya philosophy. He finds, the Nayayika finds, that the distinction between, there is a clear distinction between knower and known. And this distinction cannot be disappeared. we cannot get rid of this distinction. And if this distinction cannot be evaporated, then where is the place of Pratyabhijna philosophy? Where is the place of Advaita philosophy? So all these philosophies are established on their own arguments. And if you question those arguments, those all other philosophies are not satisfactory for the follower of different schools. Therefore, for Charvaka, this philosophy is Uttara Paksha and all other philosophies are Purva Paksha. And for Abhinav Gupta, all other philosophies are Purva Paksha and his own philosophy is Uttara Paksha. And the same story is with Jaina philosophy. For them, Anaikantavad is the ultimate philosophy. And because all other philosophies only give one picture of one side picture of reality. And this Anaikantavad gives the complete picture of reality. Okay?
Professor Timalsina, did you have a question to ask?
Yeah, I like it. We need to work on Charvaka philosophy. Professor Mishra, most of the work in Charvaka is a reconstitution of the philosophy because we do not have actually original sources, not that much, not to the extent that we have in other philosophies. This being the case, we can have a really good project to incorporate some of the references from what we find about the Ajivakas, or what we can learn from 20th century Western philosophy, including the concepts of evolution, emergence or emergentism, Daniel Dennett's type argument of the self as illusion and hard emergence. So have you explored non-Indic or other than the Nyaya Vedanta type thing, have you explored outside of the so-called Astika traditions and the Western, contemporary Western arguments? Or if you think, is it possible for maybe revisiting, buttressing the works you have done by subsuming, like integrating all the arguments developed in the 20th century that are in agreement with the original Charvaka premise? What do you think about that? Thank you.
Okay. Actually, for example, here, Nyaya Sutras were written by Akshapada Gautama. After 400 years, Vatsyayana wrote a commentary on that. So, when Vatsyayana wrote Bhashya, he was not only explaining the sutras, rather he was reinterpreting those sutras. So my idea is to reinterpret Charvaka philosophy. And the idea was this one, that we should take how the Charvaka philosophy is refuted by other philosophies. And if there is a possibility to refute those positions, taking the Charvaka side, for example, in Nyaya tradition, there is a great debate and there are so many arguments to refute that body cannot be the Atman. Why body cannot be the Atman, cannot be the knower? There are mriteshu bevicharataha. Sharirascha chaitanyam mriteshu bevicharata. The body cannot have consciousness because in the dead body, there is no consciousness and body is there. So there are so many such arguments. And how those arguments can be refuted? This I thought. And in the same way, there is a refutation of Charvaka by Buddhist philosophers. How those refutations can be refuted? I thought in that direction. And in this way, I presented this book. I worked on it. And what you are saying that if I had taken the Western concepts also, Western development, because there is a theory of evolution available, and I have gone through, but only briefly, not much. But some arguments can be taken, I have taken also, because when we are talking about artificial intelligence, nowadays we are talking about artificial intelligence. And the Charvaka philosophy is actually propounding this type of intelligence. For them, every intelligence is artificial intelligence, because every intelligence is produced from the inert, from jada. And this is artificial intelligence. So for them, every intelligence is a product of inert, jada. So that only we have taken, and in that direction I have developed.
Thank you so much to Professor Sachchidanand Mishra for this really provocative and interesting talk. Thank you all for joining us. And Charyaji, please, you can close the session.
Ji Nathadi Gurutrayam Ganapatim Pichatrayam Bhairavam Siddhaugam Vatukatrayam Padayugam Duti Kramam Mandalam Viran Dvashta Chatuska Sasti Navakam Viravali Panchakam Striman Malini Mantra Raja Sahitam Vande Guru Or Mandalam.